as convener to welcome you into the space for one of our semester talks, for which the artist is present, as they say. So as I said, my name's Maya. I'm the convener for SICA. I will be hosting one half of the hosting team with Nina Vroman, who will be introducing Kelly with me, and I'll also be doing the facilitating questions. And I'm also the coordinator for a broader program of conversations in contemporary art, which I'd like to say a few quick words about for those of you who are continuing audience members. Welcome. For those of you who are new to the series, it's been running since around 2012. And it is traditionally an annual speaker series hosted out of the MFA department. And it is a platform to welcome artists, curators, writers, scholars, educators, dare I say, like the multi-hyphenate way that we can talk about cultural producers, to share their practice with the Concordia MFA department, but also undergrad students, the broader Concordia arts community, but also interested audiences in Jazvac and Montreal and further abroad. So we start here at the podium and web outwards. One of the ways that we've been doing that is through a hybrid delivery. So we are ourselves in the room, but we are also welcoming in, I don't know where to look to say hello to our Zoom friends, but we have a room of about as many of you again on Zoom. So I just want to bring them into the room with us. We have been building a bit of a following over the past, I'm looking at you to verify this claim. Yes. Over the past couple of years, because of course, during COVID, like so many things, we had to figure out a way of ensuring there were still platforms for artists to get their work out, to get honorariums, to be paid to do their labor. So it's something that we're continuing, even though we are bringing these talks back to campus. So most of our talks that are on campus in this room, voila, we'll have the artists present, but some will continue to be welcoming in the artists via Zoom. But you can also, or tell your friends if there's any affiliates that you think they'd be interested in, can also join in via Zoom. I'm showing you also not only the upcoming talks, but a few ways that you can like and follow and to keep in tune of upcoming things connected to SICA. We have an Instagram presence, but what's most important about this website link is that it is also the interface for the archive of past artist talks. So this is a hidden, but I think very important feature of SICA, that for the most part, all guests allow us to record their talks. So it's quite a good learning resource, or if you miss a talk and you want to catch up with it in bed over tea, you can do so via the website. So do know that that archive is available, and it dates back almost to the beginning of SICA in 2012. Now, as we are gathering in a brick and mortar space, but also through the web, the ether, I want to acknowledge Territory and the Territory that supports all of that kind of webbing connection. And we're gathering on the Concordia campus, which is in downtown Montreal, and that's unceded Kanien'kehá:ka land. I'm welcoming us here on this land with a millennia of gathering and trade of knowledge and exchange through language, through gesture, through matter. As the coordinator of SICA, at my 4th year doing so, I've been an uninvited guest in Jazvac and Montreal for almost as long as I've been coordinating SICA, which is interesting. But what's more interesting is that I'm doing so as a settler educator from Treaty 1 territory, Southern Manitoba, just outside Winnipeg. Now, with the gathering of our proceedings, I want to say a few remarks of the ordering. We are going to finish our intros. I'm going to hand over to Nina in a second, who is going to introduce Kelly. Kelly is then going to do what she likes to call a well-prepared classic artist talk. Now, you have now been invited into an inside joke, which I have told Kelly I was going to tell in advance, in exchange for promising that I'll stop making this joke. So when I and start making plans for the SICA year ahead, I send an email around asking for requests, or like, who do you want to come in? What kind of event would you like to see? Because in the past in SICA, we've experimented with panel talks, with artist talks, or demos, various things. And Kelly outed herself as being the person in the feedback form who said, I just really like a classic, well-prepared artist talk, semicolon, close bracket, smiley face. And but you will know that, like, Kelly, of course, is not a visiting artist. Nina's going to say a few things about Kelly, but one of the things that SICA also does is invite in new faculty. So Kelly is not new faculty, but Kelly is busy faculty. So this is why there is a bit of a time lapse. We didn't catch Kelly for SICA when you were hired, and I came to the department after you were hired, so I just presumed you'd already done one. But through a process of web design, I realized you had not. So now you can do your well-prepared classic artist talk. And that's it from me. Enjoy the prepared talk, and I'll hand it over to Nina. Thanks for the intro.
All right. My name is Nina Broman, and I'm a second year in sculpture. And I first encountered Kelly's work in 2019 when I saw a call for a residency at Banff Center on the thematics of plastic that Kelly and her colleague Heather Davis were leading. I was unable to attend, but was fully sparked by the call that emphasized not only the immediate and devastating environmental consequences of plastic, but also encouraged a critical reconfiguration of our relation to this material, digging into more nuanced narratives that also recognize the potential connection, resilience, and queer productivity of plastic, which was really exciting for me. All this to say, I find Kelly's research, her artwork, collaborations incredibly inspiring, and feel so lucky to be pursuing an MFA under her supervision. You're in for a treat if you don't already know her work. She's not only an amazing artist and environmental activist, but Concordia is lucky to have Kelly as a graduate program director for the MFA program and is a Studio Arts Associate Professor in Sculpture. Kelly was born in 1980. I think Kelly's a Sagittarius. Yes. And in Hamilton, Ontario, and is based in Montreal. She is also part of a plastic pollution research team called the Synthetics Collective, which includes scientists, artists, art historians, philosophers, and writers. The work of this research group is highly influential on Jazvac's artistic practice. She currently has exhibitions at Musée d'Art Contemporain in Montreal, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and at the Art Museum at the University of Toronto. Her recent exhibitions include the Eli and Edith Broad Museum in East Lansing, Udowski Castle CCA in Warsaw, and the Firman Gallery in New York. Her work has been written about in the National Geographic, Eflux Journal, Hyperallergenic, Art Forum, The New Yorker, Canadian Art Magazine, and the Brooklyn Rail, to name a few. Her co-authored collaborative art science research has been published in scientific journals, including Nature Reviews, GSA Today, and Science of the Total Environment. With all this, it is my great pleasure to introduce Kelly Jazvac.
Wow. Thanks so much, Nina and Maya, for that really nice introduction. And it's so nice to be doing a SICA talk. I'm totally honored, although I'm kind of bummed I put pressure on myself to make a well-prepared, let's just call it a prepared classic artist talk. I did it over multiple sessions preparing for this. Okay, so I'll get this going. And I was inspired by some of the great questions at the last SICA talk I was at that were specifically about the positionality of the speakers. So I'm going to go a little more deeply into where I come from before I start this time, which I don't normally do. So this is where I grew up in Hamilton, Ontario. It is a suburb that my parents moved to because it was all the streets were named after birds, and they were big bird watchers. It bordered between a forest and Lime Ridge Mall. Has anyone been to Lime Ridge Mall, Hamilton, Ontario? Yes, yeah. A very massive new mall at the time that everyone was really quite excited about. And so, like, having grown up literally between this woods, and you can see this little green patch behind the the 19 Pine Warbler Court, and then the big lime ridge across from it. I spent my time either in the woods or at the mall. And the mall thing like always sort of confused me. Like everyone was so excited about this mall, and it seemed like the thing to do was to always go to the mall, but it always left me feeling quite empty. And I remember having this existential moment when I was about 8 or 9, but like, what is the meaning of life? Is it going to the mall? Like, because that's the thing that everyone was so excited about. And I decided it couldn't be that it was probably birthday parties. So we've already gotten to the meaning of life. And Hamilton is on Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga territory. And it's covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabeg to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. And Hamilton is also on a Great Lake. So this is Lake Ontario, and also a pretty formative thing for me growing up, because I was taught from as early as I can remember that you don't touch the water. It was so polluted due to industry around there, a lot of steel factories, Stelco, DeFasco, where my family worked, all my friends' family worked. It was like the coveted summer job when I was in high school because the rates were good. But there's a lot of industry around that lake that was keeping it really quite polluted. So I kind of grew up with this thing that like there's this beautiful lake that almost looks like an ocean, but don't touch it because that's really, really bad. And so again, like somewhere between like Birdland, the suburb, the forest behind me, and the mall, this like nature consumption clash was happening around me as I grew up. And so now I'm at Concordia. It's almost been 5 years since I've been here, and I've been just enjoying immersing myself in everything Concordia, and I continue to find new resources and amazing things here. I swear on a weekly basis. And so even though this is the hardest job I've ever had in my life, it's the most rewarding job I've ever had in my life. And part of my learning about Concordia was just like diving deeply into everyone that was here. And I learned more about a collage hero of mine, David Elliott, a professor emeritus. And in that research, I was listening to this great podcast called Into This Podcast, which I recommend. It's interviews with artists. And he had this quote in it that just like inspired me to be that kind of artist. So I'm not saying I'm this kind of artist, but this is what I want to be. And so he says, social change can happen through art without the art being didactic. That's my position. And so that's kind of what I'm aiming for. So there'll be quotes peppered throughout this talk, but don't take it as like me taking the theorist and saying, look, I do this perfectly. It's more the goals that I'm shooting for in my practice when I'm thinking through my work. And before I actually show you some images of some art, I'll show you some other background and to why I got into this. But a major part of my practice now is working with a collective called the Synthetic Collective. And even though I continue working as an individual artist, making individual works, I do a lot of research with this particular collective. And we're a group of artists, scientists, and humanists who are all interested in plastics pollution in some way, but particularly in how we can think about that problem through interdisciplinary conversations. And so like what art and culture and the humanities can bring to science and all the loaded history of science to actually help us get somewhere in this colonial climate crisis that we are in. Through that work, we've published a number of scientific papers, and that's something that I'm really quite proud of and unexpected in my career as an artist, to be co-authoring scientific papers in peer-reviewed journals. And through that research, we do a lot of visual communication. So this image was made by René Forêt. Thank you, René. And the research came from 2 MFA students as well, Kyle Alden Martins and Elliot Elliott. And what you're looking at is every single factory that uses industrial plastic pellets around the Great Lakes region. And that's it. So I'm really interested in this kind of imagery because the story it tells culturally, it's scientifically accurate, but it tells this cultural story, and you can, I think you can make some conclusions yourselves from what you're seeing through this visualization. And for those that don't know what those industrial pellets are, they're depicted in this image here. It's the raw pellet of plastic before it goes into a product being made. And what our collective is finding is a very high amount of these pellets present in the Great Lakes watershed. And so that's, like a major amount of plastic pollution that hasn't even become a product yet. So we hear all this pressure as us as consumers, bring your reusable water bottle, don't use a straw. Meanwhile, there's this heavy amount of pollution that is directly from industry and hasn't even touched our hands yet. So those are the kinds of things that we're really interested in, because that seems like that's where some policy change could kick in and actually make a pretty serious difference. And as part of that work too, we write a lot of grants. Sometimes it feels like I'm writing more grants than I'm doing the actual work, but that's the prof life, I think. And so here's a graphic from a recent grant we applied to that I'm showing just to bring back to that Lake Ontario slide. Because when I was a kid, instead of swimming in Lake Ontario, because you couldn't touch the water, we would go back and swim in Lake Huron or Erie instead. And so this beautiful graphic depicts the water flow of the Great Lakes. So starting in Lake Superior, that's the proportional depth of Lake Superior. Water flows into Michigan, Huron, then Erie. Then there's Niagara Falls, Lake Ontario, and then this is the St. Lawrence right here. So us in Montreal are somewhere around here. But you really get a sense of the interconnectivity of this. So unfortunately, we're downstream from Ontario, where we know that pollution is, but certainly there's been pollution found in all those spaces. And then lastly, this other thing we do is when we start these scientific inquiries as a collaborative. We do scientific papers, but then we also make art exhibitions from those themes, and we try to do it as sustainably as possible. So we try to put form and content into one thing. So we put out publications like this. This is on the internet if anybody's interested in techniques, strategies for reducing the environmental impact of making art or staging art. And we have a manifesto, and I don't want to freak you out, because I feel like number one on this would have absolutely freaked me out when I was an MFA student. Number one is, if you're going to make it count. And I think when I just arrived at my MFA, I was like, I have no idea what to make, let alone feeling the pressure of making it count. So just put that aside for now if you're not there. But the reason why I'm showing this is because I think I would have loved to have heard as an MFA student number 10, which is embrace enough, an aesthetic goal of achieving maximum impact with a minimum of resources. That goal requires drawing a line of enough at every decision point, including energy systems and work schedules. And I think that we are prone in this kind of perfect white cube museum pressure standard to think that something that actually isn't that sustainable, both resource-wise and in terms of our own bodies. So sustainability, of course, also refers to us not burning out. So just remember that enough, and maybe you could even use it in a crit. I'm embracing an aesthetic of enough. If you're being I'm just giving you tips. Okay, so now the art part. I often start with this work because I feel like it's another kind of formative work in my talks. So what you're looking at is a 1998 Pontiac Sunfire. And I did this piece shortly after finishing my MFA. I applied to the Toronto Sculpture Garden, where they had a commission for artists to do a public artwork. And so the piece I proposed was to take this economy car that didn't run and coat it in a graphic, an advertising skin that would make it look like the current model of Porsche 911. And I was really quite fascinated by this skin in particular. So it's PVC, polyvinyl chloride. I'm sure you've seen it everywhere. At the time I saw it on a lot of buses, and I was kind of resenting having to look out an advertisement to see the world out the bus. And then of course in the winter it just gets salty, and it's just even just seems even more insulting. And then this being very frustrated by this ability of advertising like colonialism to just take something and claim that as its own, and being very frustrated and fascinated by that. The car was totally covered inside and out. I took photos of an actual Porsche and then printed them 3D. So that's there's a trompe-l'oeil effect. This is a 2D image adhered to plexi. And there was a real feeling of the Porsche maybe from a distance, but then up close you see the relief of the old thing and the sense of it trying to be something more luxury than it was. And then I did the inside as well. And at this point is where the installers who were helping me with the project were like, we quit, we're not doing the inside. the material was not made to cling to carpet and these other kinds of materials. And so they let me do it. And I was loving all the bubbles and mistakes and wrinkles. And that moment where the material was quitting and revealing itself. So instead of that slick hubcap that you can barely see the material because you're looking at the image, on the interior became this moment where you can only see the material and the image starts to take a back seat. And I really like that undoing of the power of the image. And I think that's something that is continuing in my practice now. And then this super formative moment happened in the shop. They were printing one of the sides. So this is the car being wrapped. And the inkjet printer did a kind of splash on the print, which made it unusable. And I was kind of freaking out because I was on this really strict budget and I was already sort of pushing it and I was broke. I didn't have money to go beyond. And so, but they were really chill about it. Don't worry, this happens all the time. Just throw it in the back in the dumpster. So I take this thing out to the dumpster, go out and see the dumpster. The dumpster is full with every color of vinyl you can imagine. It's such a common thing for an error to happen. And the vinyl still had the sticker on it. So it was brand new material, super glossy, super seductive colors, designed from the get-go to be super seductive. And then here it was in the trash. And I just went back in and said, can I have what's in your dumpster? And they were like, sure, take it, get rid of it. Just delete any logos or identifying marks that you see on it. And so I started working that way. And what I quickly found was there were things in that garbage that really acted as evidence for a lot of the situations our current climate crisis is in and human attitudes towards the environment. You can see it up here. There's a picture of a globe, which was from a real estate company, and someone had just written garbage on it, and then it was in the garbage. If I made that as art, that would be so didactic and cheesy, but somehow if I pull it out of the garbage and somebody else did it, I was like, okay, maybe I can get away with this. Since then I've started working more with billboards than that adhesive vinyl because it's less toxic, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But yeah, here's some more samples of what I'm getting. And then so I started working, I'll back up a bit. I'm a big proponent of the more you know, the better your art will be. And that doesn't mean that, everything I research is going to be present in an essay format in my art, but that the more I can know about every material, context, history that I'm working with, the better informed my decisions will be when I make my artwork. And so I think this is a big part of how I ended up with Synthetic Collective, is just that drive to know more. And even though that always isn't perfectly illustrated in my work, I feel that that's enriching and inspiring the further decisions I make. And so part of that quest, I ended up befriending a chemist at 3M, which was a company in the city. I'm sure you know 3M, but it was based in the city that I was living at the time. And so we had lots of conversations about their practices there, the chemistry involved in this material that I was fascinated with. And they started just gifting me stuff. So this was I found these in a bag outside my office door one day that they thought I would like it. And they just as found objects were ready to go. I was so kind of enamored by them. And other times I would manipulate the material more. So I got this material that was for a car ad. It felt very much like a whale skin or a dolphin skin to me. And so I manipulated it to drop those references. And then this is the other work I like to talk about. And so there's two works that I often talk about. So sorry for those that have seen me talk before. There's going to be new work. There's going to be things I've never said before coming up. I promise we're almost there. But hopefully most of you haven't seen me talk before. So I started collaborating with this woman here, Patricia Corcoran, in 2013. And this was kind of part of the birth of the Synthetic Collective when this artist-scientist conversation started to happen. And how we met is this person in the bottom right, Charles Moore, was giving a talk at the university I was working at the time. And so I went to the talk, was totally fascinated by it, and then sought out who at the university had invited him to speak. And it was Patricia Corcoran, who's an earth scientist. And at the end of his talk, he showed a picture from a beach where there was this kind of mysterious substance on the beach. And he said that he really wanted a geologist to go and study this because he had a theory or hypothesis that lava from so the beach was on Hawaii, the big island of Hawaii, Camilo Beach. And Hawaii is positioned directly south of the North Pacific Gyre, the garbage patch, which I'm sure everyone has heard of. And the way ocean currents work, there was this kind of conveyor belt from that ocean gyre directly to this like kilometer-long beach on this land in Hawaii. And his theory was that plastic debris from this gyre was washing up, lava from the volcanoes was coming down and melting the plastic and forming this wacky new substance. That didn't like totally sound right to Patricia or I, but she was really interested in checking it out. I was interested in checking it out. So we just said, well, let's just go together and see what happens. And we really started talking for the first time, like in an airport in LA. And we kind of hit it off so well on the first time that we missed our flight. We were like chatting and they were calling our names and we didn't even notice. And so anyway, that was a whole like disaster getting there, but eventually we made it. And the most important people we met there are Ron and Noni Sanford. And so they were really helping us every step of the way. And they were kind of like, not thrilled about this lava theory because they knew it wasn't true. First of all, they've lived there for a long time. Noni is a second generation beachcomber and has watched through her lifetime the massive change happen between what's washing up on a beach, say in the 1950s to what's happening right now. And of course, that what's washing up on the beach is plastic, and what's washing up on the beach is global plastic, globalized plastic. There's no petrochemical industry on Hawaii. This is, we saw Canadian fishing tags, we saw things with Korean on them, Russian on them, like all sorts of languages. There was really quite a global mix of items on this beach. And Noni was just like, it is not lava, obviously. There hasn't been a lava eruption here since the 60s. It's locals continuing to do what they've done forever, which is like gather on these beaches and have campfires and hang out. This is their local beaches. And those beaches were so polluted that if you were to have any kind of fire at all, that would melt the plastic and start fusing with debris, beach debris. If just as a tangent, if that perspective was really interesting to me, like a kind of the scientific assumption, the scientists being called in from Canada to come and like verify the thing, and then the locals knowing the entire time exactly what was happening there. That continues to be really interesting to me. I wrote an essay on my website called Noni Knows, if you want to read more, but specifically, trying to privilege and prioritize local knowledge over the authority of Western science. So we wrote a paper. Because what we found, so even though like the spectacular story of the lava and the volcanoes obviously sounds great to hear, but in fact, what was happening was an extremely anthropogenic activity. So humans synthesizing plastic, poorly disposing of plastic, ending up through ocean currents, and then being melted again by humans. And then what we also found was that when that melting happens, it fuses with natural debris like rock, shell, stone, coral. It gains in density, and then it starts to be buried. And once it's buried, it has the potential to enter the future rock record, which means that there's a high likelihood that if you take a core sample today, or if a core sample is taken in the future, there will be a plastic strata representing our era now, and who knows what's coming. And that paper is like the closest thing to viral in my career. It just went bonkers. It got covered in all the major newspapers. There was a very strange follow-up between environmentalists being really interested in this, it being seriously considered as evidence of the Anthropocene. But then also this weird like design thing that was happening where people are like, oh, cool, a new resource. We can like make stuff out of this. And so that became this other like beast to control that I didn't expect, but I can talk about that later if that's of interest. And of course, these things are super aesthetic because plastic is aesthetic. They have these colors, they have, at times there's recognizable objects in them like a lighter or a Barbie leg. They are charismatic objects. And maybe that's something, if we're like in the Q&A period and you're wondering about what to ask, a potential question that I love just like, and polling you, is that question of beauty and aesthetics and all of this. Like, I know aesthetics was absolutely part of the viral nature of this. And yet aesthetics were also part of why some designers suddenly like, oh, we can make countertops out of this, like beautiful, it'll look great. And like where those, you know, yeah, how do we as artists balance those things and consider those things? I really think that beauty can play a role in this art considering social change in the future. That's my position. But I think it needs to be really carefully and constantly managed. This Timothy Morton quote from the book All Art is Ecological was interesting to me in terms of that beauty experience. And I won't read it all out, but he feels that, or sorry, they feel that beauty has something in it that's ungraspable, and that ungraspableness is actually a really active thing. And it's not a distortion. The distortion is actually this really messed up, normalized thing that we're all, you know, we're in this massive sixth extinction in a climate crisis, and somehow that's just become kind of normalized. Where, you know, what if we flip that and actually like the beautiful, ungraspable moment is the truth? So we can talk about that later too, if that's an interest. One more images. And of course, the context is important to me as an artist. And Ursula Le Guin says that, you know, every time you finish a novel, you've changed a little bit, that like that's changed you. And I love, like you listen to a song and that's changed you at the end of that song. And I love and I'm fascinated by the idea that art has that potential to it. And I feel that. And I think we're just like at the cusp of what art can do. Like we're just starting to figure that out. So I think that's where like even though my research is really depressing and I've deliberately avoided depressing slides, but that's something that really fuels me forward, is that like I feel this potential here in what we do as cultural workers. And I'll get to a bit more on that in a second, but this is a show that I had in New York where I was really trying to shape the context of how I displayed these plastiglomerate objects. And so they function as scientific specimens, but I also present them as artworks. So in this gallery space, I acquired a used jewelry display stand, what you see them displayed in. And then on the two walls, I had two signs that, again, I found in the dumpster, one saying home, one saying guest. I suspect it came from like a high school gym or something like that. And I simply turned them upside down in the context of these globalized objects, to hopefully prompting a sense of global accountability also, like where one, as has been said many times before, pollution doesn't respect borders. So how do we manage that going forward? Photos. And here's a sand sample from that beach. So it gives you a sense of if you had a campfire on that beach, what would happen given the high amount of plastic in it. And then here's just a shot of my email too, also on that like managing question. Very soon after we started publishing these papers and they were getting recognition, we started to get some really strange like email requests. So this one is from a trend forecaster in the UK who is asking if they can use images of plastigglomerates to suggest that's the new like trending palette for that year in design. And we were both just like so depressed. Like we said no, but like those kind of management things that come up with cultural production, and I'm sure every artist in this room has experienced that, where you like make something and then later on it becomes something else, whether it's through like a context changing around it, or and then just how you as an artist need to adapt and learn from that. Okay, now I'm changing gears. Changing gears entirely. But I'm still picking through the garbage, and now people know I like garbage, so they are like giving me their garbage. So I've got a lot of garbage, and I've gotten this museum banner that was hanging outside the Art Museum of U of T in Toronto of a Lucas Cranach the Elder painting. So they have this beautiful painting from the 1500s. It's about like this big, and they had it blown up into this huge mural that was hanging outside the museum for a long time, enticing people to come and see this very well-known painter and this valuable painting. And so I got this banner and these pieces. And I mean, this other like beautiful thing when you're digging through the garbage is like you find something, then you got to figure out what you've got and what that is, and then what you do with it. And so I like went into this deep art historical dive to Lucas Cranach the Elder, which I totally enjoyed and like brought back all my like undergrad nerdy delights in art history. But something that I've been interested in this Adam and Eve story for quite a while is reading this eco-criticism, reading feminist eco-criticism, reading Eve Tuck, reading Leanne Beda-Samosaki Simpson. There's this major Judeo-Christian origin story that is super anti-nature, anti-women, anti-animal. Women and the snake got man ejected from Eden. And nature in that story is separate from man over there, not absolutely part of the same ecosystem. And so I was really quite delighted to get an image of this very thing that I know has shaped human attitudes towards the landscape, towards the environment, in harmful and unproductive ways, in terms of how land is seen as a resource, not as us. And then I kept doing deeper art historical dives, and I came across this like quirky thing that I just absolutely loved. So Lucas Cranach the Elder was a very prolific painter and in high demand, especially the sexy Adam and Eve paintings. Everybody wanted like a little one for their house. And it was like, okay, because it was like churchy to have that in your house. And so he was really cranking out the paintings and had a huge studio production to do that. And so because of that, formulas were made for like how to paint things. So it could just be quickly showed to someone how to do that. And so the formula, and I've done this as a kid, I'm sure everyone who draws has done this. When you're drawing the eye, you like put a little reflection in it to like make it look more 3D. But in this case, they put 4 little squares. So as if someone was inside and the light of a window was reflecting into the eye. And it's throughout so many of his paintings. And if you're not knowing what I'm talking about, it's like that kind of window, like reflecting in the eye. So again, there was like this little tiny piece of evidence showing that the maker forgot that the humans were part of the landscape and actually outside, not inside, because that only would happen if you're inside a building, not outside a building. And I got hundreds of these images. I just couldn't stop collecting them, so I'll stop. Okay, so all that sort of led to this title, They Forgot They Were a Landscape, in the piece. And this is the finished work. I'll just slide through it a bit and then just do a little more description. Adam got flayed. Sorry, Adam. But I really liked the idea of like sexualizing the relationship a bit, like imagining your body sitting in that chair and where that lines up with Adam. Adam also becomes more of a spectator in this version, in my version of the story. And then Eve gets completely transformed. So this is her entire body intact, but it's been treated with a fabric manipulation technique called English smocking, where so that large billboard that's was about 9 feet tall, and now she gets compressed and transformed into something about this big. And into some other sort of creature. Transformation, material transformation, image transformation is also a recurring interest of mine. And I think, again, it's like that, like trying to unlock art's potential and what it can be. It feels like art's really good at the transformational. Here's a detail of that smocking. And then if it was like my MFA crit, and then the question was like, but why did you use smocking? Why did you use that technique? This is my answer. It's thoroughly researched. So this particular type of smocking is English in origin, although there's slightly different types that are seen all over the world. In England, it was used around workers' sleeves before elastic was invented. So it's a way to like keep your sleeves out of the mud, out of the dirt. And it's this beautiful high labor stitching technique, but has this really plastic, really practical function. Then elastic comes along in 1820 and the game starts to change. And what really interested me was this really hyper-colonial, hyper-capitalist story of the history of elastic. So here on the right is a picture of biopirate Henry Wickham standing next to a Brazilian rubber tree in the late 1800s. And so Henry Wickham was from the UK. He went to Brazil and stole 70,000 rubber tree seeds, brought them back to Kew Gardens in the UK. About 20,000 of them propagated, and then those were used. They were sent out to other colonies of Britain in tropical climates to grow that rubber. And suddenly this like massive globalized, colonially fueled rubber industry was born at the great expense of biodiversity. So that those plantations clear out what was there, bring in this other type of tree that's native to Brazil. Oh, and the apples. I should have had the apples earlier on. There were apples. I stitched them to be eaten. Okay, moving on to half an hour. Okay, perfect. I have 2 more projects to talk about, and then I will move along to questions. I just closed a show on the weekend called The Accumulating Years at Galerie Nicolas Robert in Old Montreal. And so I just wanted to talk a bit about those pieces and where they came from. This work is pretty new, and I like being like really upfront about like, you know, the newer the work, the less good you are at talking about it. So that should also take the pressure off when you like finished the MFA crit work like the night before, and then you got your hour crit about it the next day. But yeah, anyway, it's a process of figuring out what the work is, and often the context keeps revealing itself over years. Okay, so this work, I'll just give a few overviews. Made again with salvage billboards. Everyone seems very interested in where the billboards came from. So the answer is UGG shoes. These are like a bunch of billboards for UGG shoes, and then a couple, like a movie, and then some singers, some various singers. And here's a detail. So in this piece called reverse cluster tuck, a reverse cluster tuck is a particular type of fabric manipulation. And so there's these pleats that then come behind and get tucked. I liked the allusion to another type of cluster. Maybe I'll let you fill in I'll let you fill in the words. And then what I imagined is like that like cartoon when like you're sleepy and like or the Looney Tunes character is sleepy and the toothpick is brought in to like open their eyes. I was imagining these like just this wood device to like open the eye better. And what you're looking at is wood that I collected from Parc en Grignon near my house where I would walk regularly with my dog. And last summer they did a 2,000 tree cull of ash trees in that park. And so I just had this like ongoing intensity of like walking my dog while like major tree cutting was happening. And the arborist, before they would remove the tree, would flag it with a spray paint. And so I made this kind of rule to myself where if like I found branches that were spray painted, I can take that out of the woods in a way that will help the woods, not hurt the woods, getting that, again, a petrochemical product out of there. So with that wood, I carved down these little eyeballs and made beads. And Teo helped me stitch them in there. Thank you, Teo. That was not easy to hold up the reverse cluster tucks. A couple more installation shots. And this is the poster image you might recognize, a work called Supplementary Fullness. And again, that like salvaged ash wood is used as the display within it. And I was very interested in using these billboards to make portals. And so you can see that they're hung so that the bottom of the piece meets the floor. that they act like a kind of door. And a few people kept thinking that I had like cut a recessed space out in the drywall, like just the visual effect made it look like it was further back than it was. And the image that's kind of like doing this little burlesque peep show thing is a woman holding a purse that's in a buffalo plaid kind of pattern, so like this lumberjack pattern. And like many of the ads I collect, it's a beautiful female body in nature, and nature's kind of the prop for selling the thing. And yet that's again printed on plastic. And then there's this other piece in the work called plate shifting. And I'm going to talk about this in detail because I feel like this is a like take advantage of Concordia's stuff situation. I couldn't have made this piece if I wasn't at Concordia. It was technically so complicated, and Liz Zhu saw a way to do it that I didn't see. So I'll explain that in a little bit, but here's some photos first. And this is also made out of recuperated ash wood, but in this case, it's from a store called Bois Public, which works with arborists in the city who fell problematic trees, and then they clean up the wood and sell it by the board foot for excellent prices. And they have like beautiful wood. So if you're wood shopping, I would go to Bois Public. They also have maple, walnut, other types of wood. Excuse me. And an exercise I often do with students is I ask them to make like an image artist statement for something as opposed to a word artist statement. So this would be like my image artist statement for this work. And like the things I was thinking about when making it. So there's the water bottles, which like were ubiquitous in the VA building at the time. So I just took one with me to the wood shop and measured it out to get its proportions. I was thinking of like the luxury of the Terry's chocolate orange and that a tropical fruit within a chocolate, and how it comes together, and this is how you break it to enjoy it. I was thinking about icebergs calving, and that kind of crunchy thing that happens, and also about tectonic plates shifting. And this, sorry for this image, it looks like grade 9 health class or something, but that's supposed to represent tectonic plates shifting before an earthquake happens, and that like pressure and scraping that builds up. And then this is how it was accomplished through the genius of Liz. She made this jig for me, which I could put in my like normally cut pieces, plane them down to these angles, cut them in the jigsaw roughly at that shape. And then here's the nuts part coming up next. And then we turned it on the lathe with no glue because I wanted it to come together, but I didn't want more polymers sticking it together. And I wanted that feeling of something that could fall apart. And so it's just this like strip of advertising that's holding the thing together. And this was one of those pieces, like sometimes I have a very conceptual approach. Sometimes I'm responding to an image and really want to undo the power. But in this piece, I wanted a feeling, like I was like chasing a feeling, if that makes sense. And so this is kind of how I got into that feeling. But so I turned it. I will never do that again. It's a one-off piece. But we did it. But I really wanted to preserve the kind of crunchy edge. So the rest of the pieces are sanded except for that crunchy edge. So when the work comes together, like I think you can feel some of that crunchiness. I hope you can feel some of that crunchiness that's in the sliding of the work. Okay, I'm at 40 minutes, 10 more minutes left. And then another work in the show. You can see the spray paint in the top right. This is from a billboard of Ariana Grande, and the everything has been stitched except for the eye. And so, I mean, as the title suggests, onlooker, there's a sense of looking back as well as like a flag to you looking at it. Yeah, I think that's all I'll say about that for now. And then other sort of overall view. And something that's a very sculptural concern, and even though like I joke sometimes that I like barely make sculpture, even though I'm a sculpture prof, like I'm so interested in material and materiality, but like that material is like 0.5 millimeter thin is the thing that I'm like really invested in. But sculpture is so beautiful about helping us think about our bodies and scale. And when I think about pollution, climate crisis, I see parallels there. There's an issue of comprehending scale. It's so complex, it's so big, it's so hard to see. So how do we even begin to step towards that? And here's just some a few examples through the synthetic collective work of that scale thing getting really confusing. And a UVic researcher, Garth Covington, has this term stealth microplastics, and he was trying to study microfibers and how present they are. And he was doing his studies, he was using a Sharpie marker to mark his Petri dishes. And then as he was doing the counting, realizing that just using the Sharpie to write on the Petri dishes had contaminated the samples of microplastics that he was studying. Just that simple action. For the fibers people in the crowd, here's another I don't get the scale. 85 quadrillion, how much is that? I have no idea. Microfibers are released in wastewater annually from homes in Canada and the US. So within 1 year. And then to contrast that by the money involved. So here we're talking about USD $1 billion. And again, a billion is not a comprehensible amount of money for me. And yet there's this huge industry. And so I know I promised no depressing stuff. So I've got an upper coming right now. Here it is. And this is some research from one of my dear collaborators, Kirsty Robertson, who's also in the Synthetic Collective. And we do a lot of grant writing together. And if you're an artist, I really recommend go find yourself an art historian friend, because they know words good and they can help you with stuff. I just learned so much from her. So she had this beautiful comparison in this grant we just wrote that blew my mind. Because a constant defense of polluting industries is the money it contributes to the GDP and the jobs it creates. So the plastic industry in Canada contributes $35 billion to the Canadian GPD in a sector that employs 93,000 people. So I'd read that and be oh, wow, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of people. Okay, I guess that's why we pollute so much. But then Kirsty counters with this beautiful thing. The culture sector in Canada employs 400,000 people, contributing 58.9 billion annually to the GDP. It had never occurred to me to argue for the value of our cultural production through its contribution to the GDP. But look at that. That's incredible. We have so much power as cultural workers, and we don't even know, because we're not speaking that gross colonial capitalist language that the others are speaking. So that's also super interesting to me. Can we learn to speak the other languages in order to prove our own power? We are so powerful here and we don't even know it in this room. Again, the potential of art, there's something there. Okay, and last kind of series of work. This is a piece I had at the Musée d'Art Contemporain in Montreal last year as part of a large show there. And so these billboards that I work with are enormous in scale. This one came 80 feet wide by 20 feet tall. And they're meant to be seen at quite a distance. They're usually hung very high up in a city. We don't see them close. And so I'm very interested in bringing that massive scale into the museum, which is equipped to handle it. So again, the power and potential of art here. We know there's lots of problems in colonial histories with museums, but they're already there. And they're kind of open to critique and change. So what can we use there as part of this power that I'm trying to accumulate for us, or interested in accumulating for us? And so this is a billboard salvaged, again, with this these sublime colonial romantic imagery on it. It initially was a sort of cowboy Marlboro man and a little kid. And I just sort of cut out the people so that just the cowboy hat remained. But the image in the landscape persists. But then you as a viewer have the power to walk through it. But then you also see through that walking through that it's quite dirty and used and scuffed and has had a life. And I'm really I'm fascinated by that. When the image doesn't look like a perfect image anymore, I feel that can be a really active intellectual place. And a little detail of cowboy. I think when I said classic artist talk, like the thing that I really love seeing when I see an classic artist talk is just like how someone arrived at that place. Like, I just find that fascinating, you know, as opposed to just like, oh, here's my finished painting. But like when I see a little bit of like how the person arrived at that composition or image or material. So I'm going to do a little bit of like, here's how I got there story. So currently I've got to work up at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Toronto. And it was a commissioned piece. And so I acquired a skid of billboards from this salvage company in Minneapolis. And they sell products mostly to farmers to cover tractors or hay bales, like because it's a large waterproofing material. It's comparatively very inexpensive. I don't know of like a material you could buy at that quantity for cheaper. Like of anything, paper, Tyvek, fabric, like it's not even a contest. But the trick is I just get a skid of billboards and I know their sizes, but I don't know what the images are. So then I order that. I order the material based on the size of room that I'm working with, but it's like a total roll of the dice in terms of what I'm actually going to do. So then I got to do that research thing again, where I like get the images, don't know what they are, try to think of themes in between them. And this beautiful thing keeps happening every time I do this, where what I get is what you would probably expect. I just get this like snapshot of the current moment we're in reflected in the advertising industry that I've just bought back for myself. So, you know, so in COVID, I kept getting a whole bunch of study online college ads, like just everyone was like, to finish your degree online, getting like more deeper into, I don't know for post-COVID now, but like later on, the entire skid that I received was about time in some way, which I thought was super interesting. Escapism and time. So a billboard for Loki, a time traveler on the Disney Channel, a billboard for Valerian, and also a time traveling sci-fi movie, a billboard for Stella Artois, telling people to take a break and come drink a beer, and then this luxury watch as well. And then I also was working with this rock face of this black granite that a student grabbed for me just outside Arterix here. Again, knowing that I love garbage. And so those were like the billboards I was working with. Then the process is like, the hardest part actually is just figuring out what they are, because they're so big I can't unroll them in my studio. And Teo, who's my studio assistant here, has this like superpower, which we learned, where like we can just open a billboard like a little bit, and then he's like, oh, that looks like a Luc Besson film. And then, you know, and then he's on the internet and like suddenly like I know what the billboard is without having to like unroll the entire billboard. So thank you, Teo. There's a lot of modeling that happens. So like once I know the billboard, once I know the image, and once I know the scale, I can make everything proportional. René also made this model. Thanks, René. And then this other resource you have access to as grad students, the black box comes into it. So the black box is a 50-foot by 60-foot black theater performance space in the basement of the EV. So I rent that, and then I can actually unroll my billboards and just be efficient about cutting them up, getting them into the predetermined collage that I've decided on. And this is the work. So this is what is currently on view at MoCA. The piece is called Timescale. So here is a collage of Loki's chest matched with the black granite, image of black granite hanging from it. This is from Stella Artois, a wordplay kind of, that's not what it said, but I changed it to say that. And I found it interesting also in relation to the idea of time, capitalism, and then this onus put on us, the individual, and just like the pressure, like the breaking point feeling of that neoliberal pressure. If you're not getting what you want, it's because you're not working hard enough kind of thing, which we know is bogus, but that persists in the culture we have to move through. And so I like this kind of tongue-in-cheek nod towards that within the context of time. And then you look through the Loki granite and you see this face through the back. You can also walk around. The luxury clock face ended up on the floor. So you can walk through the ad, but you can also walk on the ad. And And maybe some of you recognize this actor, maybe some of you don't, but I like to think that she's judging us. I like smocked her eyebrow just to have a bit of a, my mom can do that gesture really well, but you know what I mean? Like the, the one eyebrow critical look. And then looking back at it, you can see where the two billboards get collaged together through the stitching, the white and the black. And then I was also kind of like picturing a like beach blanket being held down by running shoes at the beach. And the running shoes in this case are these granite stones. And I'll get to them in a sec. Oh, and there's a detail of the judgy eyebrow. Sorry, I just got the documentation back, so I put in a lot. I was so excited, but anyway, moving on to the running shoes holding down the beach blanket. And I got a text from Mitch Mitchell like late at night saying like, hey, there's a whole bunch of granite outside this countertop place in Mile X, like sculpture students might like that. And I was like, I might like that. I do have some extra if any sculpture students want it, but I went and got it right away. And then so if you remember, one of those billboards was for Valerian. There was all these aliens on it. In the design of aliens, I mean, that could be like a PhD thesis, how like blockbuster sci-fi movies design aliens and all the like strange things that happen and problematic things that happen. But in this particular billboard, they mostly seem to be looking at animals, things like elephants, rhinoceri. I thought there was like some nice like is it pangolin, the COVID animal, the animal that is now the COVID animal. But I wanted to slice out those that kind of imagery. So even though this is an alien and sci-fi world, here it looks more like reptilian, dinosaur-like, and again, using that like reference to time. And then they've got this little smocked edge here, almost acting like when you at Starbucks, when you buy a coffee and there's that cardboard little holder on it so you don't burn your hand, like just this like sort of cozy around it. And another view. Oh, I'm sorry, I'll try that. And then that's the answer. That was really abrupt. I should have had like more of a conclusion thing there. And then yes, thank you. Stay here. Anyone have any questions? Oh, sorry. In teacher mode.
Are there any questions? No, thank you so much for that. Well-prepared and classic artist talk. Another round of applause. Thank you. But we are at that point in our programming where we can open up to Q&A and discussion. I am going to run the mic and Nina is going to let me know if there's any questions coming through the chat or Q&A. I neglected to make sure that folks in our Zoom audience feel welcome to join the convo. So we will catch you. Are there any questions? Wonderful. Jordan, I'm coming.
Hello. Okay. Thank you to begin with, Kelly, for your wonderful talk. I was just wondering what you do with the pieces of the billboards that you don't use in the collages.
That's a good question, because through the synthetic collective, I know what happens to those collages when they go into landfills. They leach into the soil, water, air. I mean, they're going there directly if I don't get involved, but it's that like accountability thing that like, oh, now you adopted the kitten, so you gotta like you gotta see it through. So that's a raw. I mean, I do throw little bits away. We do a lot of saving, like just hoping that another slice can be useful in another context. I'm very careful about how much I bring into my studio now, though, because that part of that formative Porsche story is that not only was I getting free material, but pretty quickly I got pretty high in my studio unintentionally from the off-gassing of it. And now I'm a lot more careful about how I hoard material, as you all should be when you're working with any material. So yeah, my approach now is just being really careful about what I take. So I don't just like grab anything anymore. I'm a bit more selective about what I bring in.
Thanks for that question, Jordan. And it also brought me to, if I can hop on top of that with the accumulation of things, and there were several points throughout your talk, Kelly, that there seemed to be a role of serendipity coming into play with discovering things in the dumpster provides, but then also the serendipity of people thinking of you and directing things. So there's sort of like a webbing or network there. And I wonder if we could ruminate a little bit, if you're interested to do so, on the space and potential of serendipity as an artist method. And at what point do you try to then steer it or let serendipity do its own divinational thing?
I like that question. I think I just am open to what comes my way and then just try to understand it the best I can when it comes. And like some feedback I've gotten is that like every installation I do looks really different because the source imagery is so different. One of my collaborators in the synthetic collective, Kelly Wood, who's a photographer and like really good at like minimal living and not buying stuff, has this sort of like belief in serendipity where like, if you need a 2x4, just wait, like it'll come, just like have your eyes open. And I swear that's happened to me like 5 or 6 times walking to the studio, like, oh, I just need a piece of pink foam this big, 2 inches, and like there it is on the ground. But I think that's just like part of like the artist skill too. Like we're training ourselves to see better all the time and notice things, and then we're framing things, asking other people to notice things that weren't noticed before. So yeah, what might seem like chance, I think, is also like a symptom of just looking a little closer.
Yeah, or a kind of a tuning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Wonderful. Coming. Nina, no pressure. Do you want to read it, or shall I read it? Okay, maybe I'll give you a mic. Let's make it official, and we'll give you your own roaming mic.
So Kelly, this is from Layla. Thank you for your classic artist talk. Everyone is in on the joke. I'm curious about how the sewing enters into the collage, evoking a feeling, ... and how you move into it. Sketches, ? Especially with the scale.
I think the feeling comes from the image shifting. And I'm really interested in the shifting. Like I was trying the Tajima a bit in the textile material research labs, like a machine that does embroidery. And I was missing the feeling somehow. Like there was something about like the human trying to change the power of the image through the human's abilities, individual abilities, that seemed to bring that feeling for me. And then how I test the things. I don't like the idea of like learning a technique and then just sort of applying it blanket to an image. Like I really want to have a call and response with the image. Like I don't think it's that interesting to just sort of decorate it. Like I want to be manipulating it so that it does something. So I spend a lot of time just like staring at it. If I get desperate, I print it, but I'm trying not to print just in interest of being more sustainable in the studio. But sometimes I do have to get there. With Mocha, I definitely had to print stuff because of the scale involved. But yeah, just kind of imagining, and that, and I can manipulate it a bit so I get a sense of what's happening. But the problem with used material is like if I screw it up, I can't get another one. So I'm pretty slow and careful. And that type of material, because it's not woven, like if I put a needle through it, it's not pushing the fibers out of the way, it's puncturing it, and that makes it weaker structurally. So I'm trying to be careful about how I do that. But hopefully that answered that. Thank you, Leila, for your question.
Thank you so much. I had a question about your collective. If you could describe or talk a little bit about how you guys work together, like if you work on single projects together collaboratively, or if you're more just working separately on shared values and themes, or just I'm just throwing out examples, but if you could elaborate, thank you.
For sure. Yeah, we all have our individual research practices, and then we come together on larger projects that would be impossible to do by yourself. Generally, it starts with like a kind of brainstorm session of like, okay, where's the potential leverage point? So those industrial plastic pellets seem to us like a real leverage point that needed more study, we could actually get somewhere with as a group. Things like organizing exhibitions, that's not something that I could do on my own, or any of us really do on our own. Like that's something when we really come together and share that work. But I think the most satisfying thing to me through the process is seeing like what we can do collectively and how much that's changed the art that's being made and the science that's happening too. Like we're both really informing each other, working side by side on various projects. Did that get to it? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Appreciated how you shared also, Kelly, the tactics that you can build together, and how some collaborators can use language a particular way, and then that tactic is shared and then could go elsewhere. And that common pooling of like the maintenance work of doing intense projects like that sounds really, can't think of an adjective right now, but important, let's say.
And so satisfying, like just to have a team where like, I know Kelly Wood is the good critical reader. I know Kirsty is the writer. I know I'm more of like the stitcher of things together. Patricia is the science fact checker. Like it's such a relief to like hand something off to someone and then have them fix it. And then like, it's just, everyone should work like this. Find the people you need.
Yeah, everybody brings something, everybody gets something.
Exactly.
Yeah, question.
Hello, Kelly. I could have asked you that in the hallway, but it's a question period, so I'll ask you now. Why is didactic a bad word?
Well, I think we need David Elliott to really unpack his quote for us. But from my point of view, but that's a super good question, because like, here I am saying that I want to have an impact on how we move forward in terms of climate change. But I don't want to make didactic art, whereas didactic is telling us something clearly in a way that we can understand. And I don't want to do that. For me, my answer to that question, didactic is bad because it presents things black and white. There is an answer. There is a message. Art is amazing because it resists that and leans into complexity. And that's actually the problem we're in. We're not in a explain it in 5-minute situation. We're in a super complex ecological, social, cultural, chemical crisis. And I don't know of another discipline that's equipped and likes like hanging out in that complexity and an unknowing. And even like in my own work, how the meaning, like feeling the meaning change as the context change or as I understand it, like to me, that's super exciting and adaptive and malleable to the context. Whereas like the right answer always stays the right answer, even though it's missing like 99% of the story. And it misses that poetry. The didactic misses out on poetry, and like, why live without poetry? That's just terrible.
Follow-up retort? No? Okay. I was ready for this to keep going, but fine. Okay. All right. But if I can be the parasite again and follow up on your question, not necessarily about didacticism, but about pedagogy. And I really loved your metaphor, Kelly. Early on in the beginning of the talk, you talked about the frustration of having to look through an advert on a bus when the bus is enveloped in advertising. But I know another thing that I value about bus rides is like I get ideas for teaching in class. So let's take away the advert in that metaphor and replace it with a membrane of pedagogy.
Okay.
And I would love it for you to share with us, if it's something that happens for you, how the teaching practice that is part of your art studio practice feeds into, inspires, changes. Let's shift the didacticism and into like the collaborative teaching that you do.
I love that question. I learn so much from my students, like it's not even funny. And I really see teaching as like a reciprocal gesture, not a authoritative one. I mean, I think my main thing is like what I want for every other human on this earth. Like let's think tank how we can make it better. Everyone deserves that. And I'm really interested in teaching sustainable practices, about thinking about that. I'm starting a new class next semester about sculpture and sustainability. The program has a bunch more sustainability curriculum that's going to be hopefully unrolling in the fall if it gets approved through Senate. And so like that kind of teaching is really important to me, but also like coming in with options and hope at the same time. And like we all know it's bad. We all know it's dire in terms of what's happening to the climate, but and the world is going to be really different in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years than it is right now. But to me, that's like the super exciting part in the classroom is like, okay, let's like roll up our sleeves and speculate and use this super incredible tool of art, which is so malleable and ready to just like be what we need it to be, to try and like figure out some of those little steps forward.
Any other questions? Aaron, I'm coming for you. And then perhaps we can bring in the questions that you planted, Kelly. That was very tactical. I liked it.
Oh.
Hey, Kelly.
Hey, Aaron.
I wondered if you could talk through a little bit of what it's like to work with. We have such a two-dimensional relationship to images, and arguably like with film, a very different relationship. But it's so nice to see this like wide sweep of your work, and it seems there's a real formal, but maybe also other interest in pushing, like literally pushing bodies through images. These curtains, drapes. I keep getting the like image of the 70s beaded curtain kind of thing, but also even like references to other artists. And I'm curious, like how you see bodies moving through these images, if that is newer, if that's older. I mean, with some of the other works, even the ones that might be against the wall, there's very much a draw towards a portal with how you obstruct these recuperated images. So I'm curious what you're thinking with that. Is there something new, and especially these most recent ones that are very large scale? So like from the MAC here to the ones at MoCA in Toronto, if it's opening up new things for you in the work.
Yeah, the opportunity for someone to pass through the image feels to me that it's linked to my interest in undoing the power of the image. That you can see its back, you can see its front, you can see it from its super thin side. And I guess like maybe the didactic answer would be like a Wizard of Oz kind of response, of looking behind the curtain to see the machinery tricking us. But I think there's something. Yeah, I think it's a bit more complex than that. Yeah, like walking on a billboard or passing on a billboard in any way makes you really aware of your body. You're not supposed to touch art, and here I am like asking you to like be on top of it. And I like watching like the sort of moments of viewers of like being like cautious about that, and then like really getting into it and like stomping around. the Mocha one is testing very well with children. I almost put some like happy children photos, but then I didn't have like the parents' permission, so I didn't put that in. But children are finding lots of glee in like just blasting through the image and stomping around on the art. So I think I feel like that's good. I'm happy with that. And maybe if like a child is feeling that and enacting that like the adult is also feeling that, but like just in a more like socially reserved way.
Hi, Kelly.
Hey, Joni.
Thank you so much for your very great classical artist talk. I was really interested in, scale in your work. There's obviously like a huge interest in like the macro. I'm also wondering if there's maybe an interest in image manipulation on like the microscopic level. Not that I know what that would look like, but yeah.
That's interesting. I've never manipulated an image through a microscope. I have done work with microscopes, like making video of sorry, I talked too much with my hands. Okay, put my hands in my pockets. Making video of scientists manipulating plastics, but not an image. No, that's interesting. It makes me think of this beautiful display at the Museum of Jurassic Technology in LA, and I forget the artist's name, but he was using dead butterflies to make mosaics, and then you have to look at it through a little magnifying glass in the museum. It's just like this tiny little image made from the images that were already like embedded in the camouflage of the butterfly's wings, like just kind of astounding. So that's another artist's work that's really cool, but not mine.
From the chat, we've got Natasha asking, in terms of art producers creating GDP, does thinking about cultural production in this way put value on the consumability of art creation? Do you think there is a risk when projects become too aesthetic in a way that makes them more of a consumable experience rather than a visual puzzle for the viewer to seek to understand the deeper meaning?
Love it. Yes, I do. I think there is a risk. I think we're seeing that play out a little bit now, where designers and architects and some artists too are being brought in for like the Instagrammable shot, so that people want to go to the museum to get the cool shot with the thing that looks good in the background. And I'm definitely flirting with that in the larger scale things for sure. I intend there to be more grit in those images, like seeing this dirty, like literally dirty billboard and passing through it, that will challenge that. Because it is a venue again, like I might sound like such an opportunist, but like the museum is a frame that's already got our attention and already got the infrastructure there. So how can that be used without sort of slipping into that aesthetic thing? The Jason Farago talk that Art Speaks did, was anybody there at that talk? It was a few months ago. Art Speak talks are great. Everybody should like be attuned to that. But he was talking about that. And it was kind of this beautiful like photo montage of like just all these like wacky, like not art things that museums had commissioned so that people could have good Instagram photos, like even in the lobby without even paying to go in the museum. And he really talked about like the need for grit and friction in those moments. So I was pretty interested in that and kind of made a mental note of like, okay, like there's got to be grit. There's got to be grit.
We've also got another question from Layla. Can you tell us more about how the writing of the manifesto took place?
Oh, yes, Layla, who's also interested in manifestos. In a Google Doc. Just simply thinking about what we wanted art to be. And lots of back and forths. And the first draft was like really militant, and you know, it kind of had this word like, okay, no art is going to get made if this is the manifesto. Like this is too intense, and I'm not at the point yet where I think we should make no art as a way to fight the climate crisis. I think there's still potential there. So yeah, very militant first draft, and then like slowly massaging it into something that like, okay, this could actually be a way that could work.
All right, we're going to return to the
There's a lot of
The
the
people in the
chat's
VA.
going on there.
blowing up. All right, thanks, Martin.
Hi, yeah, thanks for the artist talk. And my question is, you had said earlier that you were chasing a feeling, and then we also talked about serendipity. So I think I was wondering if in your process, if you have, instead of chasing or responding, if there's like sort of an intention before even. I'm really interested into the idea of responding, but I'm also interested in like the intention prior to the response. And if you approach like, oh, if I only had like that one billboard, like you're like trying to chase down that image or something.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, I try not to like get hopeful about the images that I will receive, because I don't want to be disappointed, and I like want to be open. But like anything with a nature scene on it, which are pretty prevalent, but that like I get quite excited when I get that. And again, because of how it speaks to histories of colonialism and capitalism within this advertising medium. But the chasing of a feeling, that I know in advance. So regardless of what I'm getting or the materials I'm getting, I have an idea of what I want to feel and what I want people to feel when they look at the work. And sometimes that's just super slow. I think that's a bit one of the challenges of working with found things and more like getting materials by chance is I just have to wait it out. And so that like iceberg caffeine crunchy chocolate orange feeling, like I just had to, like, I knew I wanted that. I knew I wanted that in wood, but I couldn't. And then, you know, I was seeing all these ash trees being felled in Ancrignon, and I just like, I didn't know how to get the log home. So it was still in like big tree format. You know, so just waiting until I sort of figured it out and learned about Bois Public and then could pounce on it. But yeah, my sketchbook has like, just like, you know, it's kind of like a miasma of what this work is going to be. And then I'm waiting for the pieces to come into place so that I can act on it. Which is not helpful information if you've got like a crit in December, but that's the way it is.
But we now have your point number 10 in the manifesto.
That's right.
So,
Embrace
yeah.
embrace an aesthetic of enough. Don't burn yourself out.
I think we maybe have time for one more question. Is there something on the Zoom or in the room?
There's Zoom from Nicole, working with plastic as a medium, plastic pollution, research, and on climate advocacy, like you said, can be very depressing work. What are some strategies you use to stay hopeful about the future?
Good question. Like on a very basic level, like baths and tea. On like a more intellectual level, like I have to, like there's so many young people in my life that I love. I can't, like, I'm not going to just like, oh, sorry about that. I just feel very driven to just work on that. So there's something about feeling strong enough to like open my eyes to the reality that is hard to do, but I feel like it's necessary. And weirdly, it makes me feel stronger rather than weaker. Like just like, okay, no, I can handle this. I have baths. I can lean. I want to know the truth. I find knowing the truth is less anxiety producing than like just being afraid of what's there without looking at the monster kind of thing. Like the monster you don't see in the horror movie is scarier than the monster you do see in the horror movie. I want to like look right in the eyes of the monster.
Good notes to end on. I can give you this mic to drop if you want. But in all seriousness, can we please thank Kelly again for her wisdom and remarks? Thank you, everyone. That felt like a really earnest Q&A discussion. So I appreciate that extra work after. Can I say it again? A well-prepared artist talk. But I also want to extend thanks to someone that we can't see, Jean-François, the tech in the box. Thank you so much. Hey. And also to Nina, co-hosting at the beginning, but then suddenly also throughout and at the end. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
So the next SICA engagement is the 4th of November. We will be gathering in the hybrid fashion again to welcome in B. Oakley of Genderfail. So hopefully you can join us again in some capacity. For the time being, if anybody's thirsty and wants to stare in the eyes of the monster with Kelly at the pub, some of us will be going to a pub yet to be determined, but will be determined in the following few minutes. So thank you, of course, for coming. Wonderful to share space with you. Adieu.